It began with the scent of pine and the crackle of firewood, a morning so still it could have been painted. I had arrived at the lake ranch the evening before, the tires of my old truck crunching over the gravel as the sun dipped behind the horizon. The property had been in my family for decades, passed down from my grandfather, who had claimed the land when men still shook hands to seal a deal. It sat at the edge of a mirror-still lake, wrapped in ponderosa pines and the sigh of wind over water. No phone towers, no schedules, just nature and solitude. I pitched my tent beside the weathered log cabin my grandfather built in 1973. A fishing rod rested against the porch, untouched since his funeral. I set a fire in the pit, grilled a modest dinner, and watched stars emerge, unchallenged by city lights. I came here to remember him, and maybe to remember a part of myself. By morning, that peace was shattered. I had just cracked an egg into a sizzling pan when the crunch of tires disturbed the silence. A Lexus SUV, beige and spotless, rolled to a slow, deliberate stop at the edge of the clearing. Out stepped a woman dressed in matching beige, tracksuit, visor, and oversized sunglasses that concealed most of her face, but not the disapproval radiating from it. She approached with a clipboard clutched like a badge. "Excuse me," she snapped, glancing down her nose. "You can't camp here. This is HOA property." I blinked, unsure if I was hearing her correctly. "This is private land. Mine." She frowned. "This is part of Lakeside Meadows. I'm Karen DeWitt, president of the Homeowners Association. Camping is not allowed." Her name explained everything. I stood, wiping my hands on a towel. "My grandfather owned this land. I have the deed. It's never been part of an HOA." Karen tilted her head, skeptical. "All lakeside properties here are under the association. If you're camping, you're in violation." I walked to my truck and pulled the folder from the glove box. Inside were the property records, signed, stamped, notarized. She flipped through them with a tight frown, then handed them back as if they were counterfeit bills. "I'll have to call the sheriff," she said curtly.
She did.
When Deputy Harlan arrived 20 minutes later, he stepped out of his cruiser with a posture that said he'd dealt with this woman before. He reviewed my documents, asked a few routine questions, and then tipped his hat. "Looks like you're in the clear," he said. "Your land. But I'd recommend talking it over with the HOA just to keep things neighborly." Karen looked as if she'd swallowed a lemon. "He should still move," she muttered. "This kind of behavior invites trouble." The deputy gave her a measured look. "Ma'am, this is an HOA jurisdiction." She turned without another word and marched back to her SUV, tires spitting gravel as she sped off. I thought that was the end of it. It was only the beginning. The next morning, I found a bright yellow notice nailed to a pine near my tent. It read like a parking ticket crossed with a cease and desist. Unauthorized camping. Fire hazard. Environmental violation. A fine of $1,000. Signature. HOA Board of Directors. I stared at the notice for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or rage. Instead, I poured myself coffee and sat on the porch. Karen had made a mistake. She saw a man in a tent and assumed weakness. But this was my land, my home by blood. My grandfather had warned me about people like her. "They don't build things, son," he'd said. "They manage what other people build, and they think it makes them powerful." I spent the rest of the day exploring the property line, walking its borders like a soldier on patrol. The lake shimmered in the afternoon sun, dragonflies dancing across its surface. I saw the signs, then literal ones. Metal plaques posted every 50 yards, engraved with HOA branding. Lakeside Walk, a community space. Benches, lamp posts, trash bins, all of it on my land. They hadn't just claimed the lake access. They had invaded. I traced the path from the edge of the woods to a wooden gate marked with a flowery sign. "Welcome to the Serenity Loop. HOA members only." That gate was installed inside my property line. Back at the cabin, I dusted off my grandfather's filing cabinet. Tucked in a folder marked Land Surveys were the original maps. Coordinates. Fencing notes. Hand-drawn and professionally surveyed. There was no ambiguity. The HOA's trail, their benches, their signs, all of it was built on my grandfather's land. My land. And they had no idea I knew. The peace I had come for was gone, replaced by something sharp and cold. Not just anger. Resolve. I made a list. I took photos. I flagged coordinates. I set up trail cameras hidden in birdhouses and inside hollowed-out logs. I logged the license plates of every trespasser. I started building a case. By the third evening, I sat by the fire again, but this time not to relax. I watched the flickering flames with a notebook in my lap, each page detailing the evidence, times, dates, names. At 6:42 p.m., a couple strolled along the Serenity Loop, pushing a baby carriage. They paused near my tent, admiring the view. "Isn't this part amazing?" the woman said. "Karen said they added this whole section last year," her partner replied. They had no idea they were standing on stolen ground. It wasn't their fault. They'd been lied to. But someone had to answer for it. Later that night, I caught Karen again. Her Lexus parked near the gate. She was inspecting the trail, clipboard in hand, muttering into her phone. She didn't see me standing in the shadows. She wouldn't for long. As the fire died to embers and the stars stretched overhead, I knew two things for certain. One, this land was mine, and I would fight to defend it. Two, Karen had started something she couldn't finish, and I was just getting started. The yellow notice was just the start. What followed felt less like a misunderstanding and more like a calculated siege. By the third day, Karen's influence was everywhere. I awoke to the distant whir of a drone buzzing above the tree line. It hovered over my camp like a vulture before zipping back toward the residential side of the lake. Later, a fresh sign appeared on a tree. Unauthorized occupation of community property is a criminal offense. Violators will be prosecuted. This wasn't confusion. It was intimidation. But intimidation works best on people without facts. I had facts. And now I needed more. That morning, I drove into town and made my way to the county assessor's office, a modest brick building with a sun-worn sign and a sleepy front desk clerk. After explaining my situation, I was directed to a back room filled with public records, maps, deeds, zoning documents, and decades of bureaucratic breadcrumbs. I pored over plat maps, comparing them to the ones my grandfather left me. At first glance, they were identical. But 10 years ago, a new version appeared in the county record, submitted by the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association. The map showed an updated trail system and a shaded area labeled Community Lake Access, exactly where my property extended into the lake. I cross-referenced GPS coordinates. They had redrawn the boundary to include my peninsula and labeled it as common land. No purchase. No permission. No annexation. Just lines on a map, and the arrogance to think no one would notice. Back at the ranch, I dug deeper. The so-called Lakeview Walk trail wasn't just a walking path. It was a fully constructed loop with manicured gravel, solar-powered lamps, decorative signage, and even a wooden overlook labeled Serenity Point. They'd named a section of my land. I walked the trail with my camera, documenting every violation. I took photos of the benches and measured distances from the original property markers. All of it was on my land, every inch. And Karen knew it. That afternoon, her SUV returned. This time, she didn't get out. She parked just outside the gate and stared. Her posture was rigid. Her sunglasses reflected the cabin like twin mirrors of contempt. I walked toward her, slowly, hands at my sides. She rolled down her window. "You think you can scare us with your signs and cameras?" "No," I said. "Just documenting crimes." Her nostrils flared. "That trail is a community treasure. We have maintained it for years. Your grandfather never objected. My grandfather also didn't install gates or hang flyers. That was you. You don't understand how things work here." "I do. And so will the court." She drove off, tires flinging gravel like a declaration of war. That night, I reviewed the footage from my trail cams. Over a dozen walkers had passed through in a single day. Some waved at the cameras. Some paused at benches. One family had a picnic on the overlook. I couldn't blame them. They thought they belonged. Karen had weaponized their trust. So I called Greg Turner. Greg was an old friend of my father's, a property rights attorney who ran a small but formidable practice in Flagstaff. I laid out everything: the notices, the altered maps, the unauthorized construction. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he said, "Send me everything. We're going to make this very uncomfortable for them." The next day, Greg delivered a cease and desist letter to the HOA office. It was direct, factual, and unflinching. It outlined every violation in bullet-point precision: encroachment, trespassing, false claims of ownership, and public misrepresentation of private land. They had 10 business days to respond before we filed suit. Karen's reaction was immediate. That evening, the HOA released a newsletter titled, "Preserving Our Community from Hostile Actors." It didn't name me, but the implication was clear. I was framed as a recluse with aggressive tendencies who threatened families and opposed public enjoyment of the lake. The letter claimed the land had been part of the community for over a decade and questioned the validity of my ownership. I read it under the glow of a kerosene lamp, fists clenched. They weren't just fighting for land now. They were fighting for a lie. And they had no intention of backing down. Later that week, I found the trail cam smashed, their wires yanked and left hanging like vines. Someone had slashed the tires of my truck. On the cabin door, painted in red, "Go home." But I was home. I replaced the cameras. This time, I hid them better, camouflaged as birdhouses and embedded in tree trunks. I updated the signs with stronger language and legal citations. I installed motion sensors that fed directly to a secure drive. Greg was building our case, but I was preparing for battle. Then came the neighborhood meeting. I hadn't planned to attend. But when Greg insisted, I agreed. We arrived together, a folder thick with documents under his arm. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a modern structure nestled on the east side of the lake, far from my cabin. About 30 residents had gathered, sipping coffee and murmuring nervously. Karen stood at the front like a conductor before an orchestra, flanked by 2 grim-faced board members. She began with flair. "We are here today to address a growing concern. A man has taken residence in a disputed area of our lake trail. He has posted threatening signs, installed surveillance equipment, and has refused to cooperate with our community guidelines." She paused for effect. "This is not just about land. It's about preserving peace." Then Greg stood. Calm. Precise. Devastating. He introduced himself and laid out the facts. Property boundaries verified by the county. Original deeds from 1973. Satellite imagery. Footage of trespassers. Construction without permits. False mapping submitted by the HOA. Every word punctured Karen's narrative like a pin to a balloon. Murmurs rose. Faces shifted. Several attendees glanced at each other, suddenly unsure. Greg ended with a warning. "If this does not stop, we will pursue civil action, including financial damages." Karen tried to speak, but the room had turned. The meeting ended in chaos. Some residents approached me privately, apologizing. Others looked away. Karen stormed out, her board members trailing like shadows. That night, I returned to the ranch under a full moon. The air felt clearer. The fire crackled like applause. I had exposed their secret. And now, they had no place left to hide. After the neighborhood meeting, the energy around Lakeside Meadows shifted. Where there had been smug certainty, there was now doubt, and Karen DeWitt felt it closing in around her like fog. For the next few days, things were oddly quiet. No new notices appeared. The Serenity Loop Trail remained empty. HOA emails dried up. It was the kind of silence that hinted at strategy, not surrender. I kept my routine. I logged footage. I documented every visitor, every motion. Greg filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board, including the altered plat maps. We had them cornered on paper, but I could feel Karen hunting for another move. She was not the type to fold. Then came the surveyors. A white truck arrived early one morning, 2 men in neon vests, stepping out with tripods and GPS units. I met them at the trailhead. "Morning," I said, stepping into their path. They hesitated. One checked a clipboard. "We're here to reassess trail boundaries for the HOA. "Private land," I said, pointing at the markers. "Unless you've got a court order. Turn around." They didn't argue. They packed up and left. An hour later, I got a call from Greg. "They're trying to file a retroactive easement claim," he said. "Karen's arguing that the trail has existed without contest for long enough to be grandfathered in as public access. She wants to steal it legally now that she can't fake it," I said. "Pretty much." The legal battle was accelerating. We filed an injunction to halt all HOA activity on the disputed land. Greg was confident, but it was clear Karen was still in this to win. And then, someone set fire to my dock. It happened just before midnight. I woke to the crack of splitting wood and the orange glow against the cabin walls. By the time I reached the shore, half the dock was already engulfed. I used the fire extinguisher, then buckets of lake water. I stopped it before it spread to the trees, but the damage was done. The dock, built by my grandfather's own hands, was charred ruin. Sheriff's deputies arrived by morning. They took statements, photos, but the message was clear. This wasn't random. Karen never showed her face, but I saw her handiwork in every ember. The next day, Greg filed for a temporary restraining order. He also petitioned for law enforcement to investigate HOA actions. The mood among the residents soured visibly. I noticed fewer walkers on the trails, fewer kids playing by the lake. One neighbor drove by and gave a small nod of solidarity. Word was spreading. And truth, once loose, has a way of finding ears. I decided it was time to go public. That afternoon, I uploaded a video. I blurred faces, masked names, but I laid out the facts: the altered maps, the illegal trail, the smashed cameras, the fire. I showed the property lines, the dates, the legal documents. Within 2 days, the video had thousands of views. Messages poured in. Some from lakeside residents who hadn't known the full story. Others from people around the country who had their own HOA horror stories. It struck a nerve. Karen called it defamation. Greg called it public record. Then something strange happened. I got a letter. A real one, handwritten on monogrammed paper. It was from Lawrence Bledsoe, one of the original board members of the HOA, retired, living in Arizona now. He'd seen the video. He wanted to talk. We spoke the next morning. "I warned them years ago," he said, voice trembling with age. "When they started extending the trail, I told them we didn't own that land. Your grandfather was always polite, but he never gave permission." "Then why did they build it?" I asked. "Karen." She said the paperwork was just a formality, that no one would check. After your grandfather passed, she pushed everything through. The board trusted her. "Did you sign off on the false map?"
"No," he said.
By then, I'd stepped down. But I regret not doing more. He sent a written statement, notarized. It was the final nail. Greg smiled when he read it. "She's done. This is enough for civil, possibly even criminal charges. Let's hit the gas." But Karen wasn't done. 2 days later, she filed a lawsuit of her own. A countersuit for harassment, emotional distress, and defamation of character. It was flimsy, poorly constructed, and legally empty, but it showed her desperation. Then came the town hall meeting. Unlike the HOA meeting, this one was public. The county had scheduled it to discuss zoning changes and HOA overreach. Dozens of residents attended. Greg and I were there, documents in hand. So was Karen. She wore a power red blazer and a brittle smile. For 2 hours, the floor opened to residents. Some defended her, arguing she had improved the neighborhood, beautified the lake. Others weren't so sure. "I thought that trail was public," one woman said. "Now, I feel like I've been trespassing for years." A man stood. "We trusted the HOA. If they lied about this, what else have they lied about?" Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, every eye in the room on me. I didn't come here to pick a fight. I came here to spend a weekend at the lake my grandfather gave me. But I found a trail I didn't build, signs I didn't post, and people who thought I was the trespasser. I held up a laminated deed. This land is mine. This proof is real. And I won't be bullied off of it. There was a long silence. Then applause, scattered at first, then growing. Karen stood up, her face red with rage. "This is a witch hunt," she snapped. "We've done nothing wrong." The county commissioner raised a hand. "Ms. DeWitt, there is overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Your actions will be reviewed. If necessary, the matter will be escalated to the district attorney." Karen sat down, visibly shaking. That night, I returned to the cabin with a strange mixture of calm and anticipation. The fire crackled softly, a breeze dancing through the pines. My grandfather's land was quiet again. But it wasn't over, because Karen had built her power on illusion. And illusions don't die quietly. They shatter. Weeks passed. The lake, once echoing with joggers' footfalls and polite HOA chatter, had grown still. Where Karen's presence once hovered like a storm cloud, now there was only the rhythmic lap of water and the wind threading softly through the pines. But beneath the surface, things moved. The county investigation launched quickly. Greg's meticulously prepared evidence, satellite overlays, land surveys, notarized testimony, had sparked more than civil litigation. The district attorney's office began probing the HOA's history of unauthorized developments, questionable spending, and doctored documents. Karen was subpoenaed. So were two other board members. The fire marshal returned with a full report on the dock fire. Accelerant was found. Though they didn't yet have a name, arson was now on the record. My cabin, once a temporary retreat, became a command post. Greg visited often, bringing updates. The mood was serious, but measured, like the final moves of a long chess game. One morning, I found a folded piece of paper wedged in the front gate. "I didn't know," it read. "I'm sorry for what happened. We were told lies. Many of us were." It wasn't signed. The tide had turned. But I didn't feel victorious, just steady. Then came the final hearing. A courtroom, beige and windowless, full of tired chairs and tension. Karen sat at the defense table, noticeably thinner, dressed in black, her expression rigid. She no longer looked like the tyrant of neighborhood walkways. She looked like someone cornered. Greg presented our case with quiet force. "This isn't just about one property," he said. "It's about a pattern of deception and entitlement. The HOA overstepped every boundary, legal and ethical." Karen's lawyer tried to pivot. She didn't act alone. There was community support, precedent, misunderstanding. But the judge was unswayed. The ruling came swiftly. The HOA was ordered to remove all encroachments on my property, trails, benches, signage, within 30 days. A formal correction of the county plat map would be filed, reversing the HOA's false submission. Karen and two other board members were held personally liable for damages and legal fees. Further investigation into HOA financial mismanagement would proceed independently. And the kicker: a restraining order barring Karen from approaching within 500 feet of my property. When the gavel fell, it didn't echo. It landed firm and final. Outside the courthouse, Greg clapped me on the back. "You didn't just win," he said. "You changed the rules of their little kingdom." I drove back to the lake under a wide Arizona sky. The sunset painted the water with gold and ember tones, like it knew something had finally settled. By the next week, a work crew dismantled the trail. Boards came up. Benches disappeared. The signs were hauled off. The overlook once named Serenity Point was just a bare stump of dirt again. No longer stolen serenity, just peace, unbranded and true. I stood at the dock's edge, rebuilt now, with reclaimed wood and quiet determination. My grandfather's spirit felt close. The land was mine again, not just by paper, but by fire, fight, and patience. Karen moved away shortly after the ruling. No farewell. No fanfare. Her house was listed discreetly, bought by a family who had no interest in HOA politics. Lakeside Meadows still existed, but the iron grip of its queen was gone. As for me, I stayed. What began as a weekend turned into a life I hadn't planned, but somehow always needed. The lake was no longer just inheritance, it was identity. Roots. And when people walked nearby now, they waved. Not as trespassers, but as neighbors. And I waved back.